So, welcome back. We're holding on page 158, right in the beginning of the brackets, just under the half of the page. Easy to tell again. We came up to the brackets in which we were going to begin the brackets at this time to understand the message of the entire Shaykh V'Emunah up till now, and in this very chapter, this new Chidush of the Alter Rebbe, which established important perspective in this very chapter, Dalid. Please, I invite you to go to the previous classes. It's a click away instead of taking the time. Even there's always an urge to take some time, and especially when you're beginning a new, as we begin a new class, especially when we're in the middle of the chapter, to take the time and see how we find the flow from the previous message, from the previous points that Alter Rebbe makes in this chapter to get into the class today, the information we're going to learn about today, but we need not to, in essence. Really, it's a click away. As you're watching it, especially for the newcomers, we mentioned time and again, you could always watch it on the original site. Wherever you're watching this class, but you could always watch it on the original site, that which you have access to all the previous classes. Also, the advantage and virtue of the way this website is, the original website is set up, that you have the text on a separate scroll bar, so it's simply easier to follow, easier to try to find the information that you're looking for. In other words, you can see it pretty much, you could find it corresponding to that text which you're trying to make out, or generally if you want to watch the class beginning to the end, it's very easy to follow again as the text does in a separate scroll bar, and also all the other classes of Shaykh V'Emunah, previous segment of Likutei Amorim, comes up in the very same manner. So, for example, this class Dalid, this chapter Dalid, which we're learning, I believe it's the third or fourth class. So it's click away. It's just a matter of to understand the information, which instead of taking time to re-explain these points, even briefly, to go into the next to start with where we're holding today. It's really extra. You can see it and appreciate the message and its connection to today's class. Also, even all the previous classes of Shaykh, when it's one continuum, it's one idea, the Alter Rebbe is conveying, again, very, very easy access. All the classes are lined up on the left side of the screen, and again, it comes up in the same manner. So we're holding in the brackets. V'hine b'chinas hatzimtzum b'hester achayis nikra b'shem kelim. So one thing is very clear, that the Alter Rebbe in Perek Dalid came up with an important chidush. A chidush not to be mechadish, but to reconcile. In other words, not stam to be mechadish, but kind of without this chidush of the Alter Rebbe in Perek Dalid, we remain really stuck with a very important question. And the Alter Rebbe himself so emphatically asks this very question at the end of chapter Gimel. And this is the conclusion of chapter Gimel, after he makes it so clear, the message, right? The theme, the theme threading throughout the entire Shaykh V'Emunah up till now, or up till Perek Dalid, is that there's nothing else within every existing matter other than the Dvar Hashem, the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it continues to vitalize it, just like the same Dvar Hashem, the same energy which created, again, when we say Dvar Hashem, it's worthwhile to look at chapter Aleph, and as he says that every single item has the name of the item is intrinsically connected to the item. It's precisely that type of flow, or that type of energy, which comes from that very word in Lashon HaKodesh, and that allows that creation to be created in its exact style, appearance, function, and so on. Again, it's worthwhile to see. So it makes it very clear that Lashon HaKodesh is so distinct than any other language. So in the end, but ultimately, just like when Hashem created the world, there was no world, and then Hashem brought world into being, the ex nihilo idea, phenomenon. We gave the example, we focused on the stone. Again, we use the same one item, but again, naturally applies to every single item in the inanimate, in the botanical world, the animal world, and naturally, when it comes to the medaber, to the human being, that all they have this common denominator, that there was a time they didn't exist and now they do, which again, they were brought into existence from a state of nothing to a state of something. And the only reason why they exist is because this Dvar Hashem, this is the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which brought it into being. Hashem spoke creation into being. Basaram Amoris Nivra Ha'olam. With the Tain saying that Hashem created the world with Dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu V'rach Piv Kol Tzvam. These are psukim again. And this Mishnah, the famous Mishnah, Basaram Amoris Nivra Ha'olam, which tells us again, Hashem spoke. Kihu Omar Vayehi. He spoke. And it was. He spoke creation into being. Before that, there was nothing. And then it came into being, the entire creation. Again, it was within 6 days. And Alter Rebbe points out, again, based on the pasuk, that La'olam Dvar Hashem Mitzvah B'Shamayim. It wasn't something happened in the 6 days of creation, but it's something which continues to reoccur every single moment, every single second, every single millisecond for that matter. Hashem continues to pump creation into being. In other words, to pump his energy into creation. And that's the only way they exist. So if you look at the stone, the reason why the stone is there, it's not there because it was just there 10 minutes ago or there thousands of years ago and Hashem brought that stone into being. But no, Hashem is giving the stone life now, and if Hashem pulls back the life and energy from the stone, right? These are psukim again, if you recall in the first chapter, that it brings as a basis for this whole thought. Again, the other psukim, which the Alter Rebbe brings this proof in Perek Beis, the famous proof the Alter Rebbe brings from Kriyas Yamsuf, the way Kriyas Yamsuf unfolded, the splitting of the Red Sea unfolded, and all these psukim in Memari Chazal, which tell us that it's not that Hashem created creation in the 6 days of creation and then they just there because nothing changed, but every moment Hashem continues to create them. And if Hashem pulls back on his energy, it's not that something would fall apart, ruin, decay. No, it would just disappear. And it wouldn't exist at all. Literally, you would not see it if Hashem decides not to pump creation, pump the energy into creation at this very moment. So then creation would cease to exist in the same fashion it was not before Hashem created the world. In its exact same fashion. So what is ultimately the chayis? When you look at a stone, it's not really the stone, the tangibility of the stone, or the appearance of the stone. What it really is, again, not 80% of it, 90% of it. Again, we're shooting tidbits, if you will, of the previous chapters, just to get into what we're learning today. Right? We said we're not going to waste time, but again, I feel it's almost inevitable just to really try to get the flow over here, at least minimally. So so what is it in the end of the day? It is the Dvar Hashem Mekayim. It's not only 80% of it, 90%, it's 100% of it. So why do we see so much Olam Hazeh the way we do? Why don't we see the Dvar Hashem the way it will be when Mashiach will come? If you remember again, we spoke of Malach Deis Hashem, Kamayim Liyom Mechasim, the Navi says, with maximum precision. It's not just an expression, just like the water fills the ocean bed, the seabed. No, these terminologies are precise as we explain this pasuk that Mashiach will come. Primarily, we'll see the Dvar Hashem, and then we'll try to navigate through the Dvar Hashem. We'll see the created being, and that is all it lies therein in the pasuk of Malach Hashem. Kamayim Liyom Mechasim. Right? You look at the ocean. What do you see first? The chayis, and then within the chayis you see all the nivraim, or you can find many of the nivraim, and the more you look, you can see more and more. But what do you see on the onset? You see the Dvar Hashem. You see rather the chayis, which is the ocean, the water. And so to Mashiach will come, we'll see the emes Hashem la'olam. This is what we're going to see. This is going to be default. standard. This is what's going to be when Mashiach will come. We will see primarily the Dvar Hashem. And so, but the question is really if the reality is not, that's not going to change when Mashiach is going to come. Until now, they stand as an independent entity, and therefore we see them the way they are. Mashiach will come, and they will kind of again reconnect to that Dvar Hashem which created them in the 6 days of creation. Therefore, we will see when Mashiach will come, we will see the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu prior to seeing the entity of the created being. No, it's constant. And this doesn't change when Mashiach will come. Mashiach will come, we will see the emes Hashem la'olam. The question is, the question begs, why don't we see it now? That's the true 100% of its reality. Why don't we see it now? This is the question, the star question that Rebbe concludes Perek Gimel with in Perek Daled and introduces a new idea. And he says, yeah, this is part of Hashem's might, that in essence, the only reality of this very creation is the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and truth of the matter is that's the only thing we should be able to see on the first glance with our physical eye or a sensory eye, because that's what it truly is. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu has another midah, which is the midah of Gvura, which covers up over the emes, which in this case would be the chesed, which conceals the chesed. In other words, this kayach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to create ex nihilo, from something to nothing, from nothing to something, and therefore what we should have seen is only the Dvar Hashem, the word of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which continues to create. And that's the only thing we should have seen, because that's the truth of all realities, the 100% truth of every reality. That Hashem is another midah gvura, which conceals that. And again, Heinen Gvura, it brings the famous Gemara. This is part of Hashem's might, that He's able to conceal Himself. Not everybody is able to conceal themselves in such a fashion. It's a kunz, as they say in Yiddish. It's a talent to one to be able to conceal who they really are. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu has this midah in a very absolute, its function is very absolute, because like everything of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is absolute, so just like His chesed is absolute, and we can't perceive the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who could ever not only implement yesh mi'ayin to create something from nothing, we can't even perceive the idea of the phenomenon of yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing, and so too we can't perceive the idea of gvura, that it should be and not to be in the same. In other words, it should be the way it really is, which is again just the flow out of energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in the same token, that which again is 100%, nothing less than 100% of matters of creation, yet at the same token we should not be able to see it. That's the Gvura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's part of the might of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, we're saying this very brief. It's important really to get the spirit of this message of the Gvura by clicking on the information of this chapter, Perek Daled. Perek Daled, I believe this is even the fourth class or the third, but just to understand the Chidush of Perek Daled, which naturally reconciles. You don't see, it's not because it's not, it isn't so, it's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actively concealing, actively covering, actively hiding Himself. But in the end, what Alter Rebbe is going to say, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu hiding Himself, right? Remember we said the difference of someone placed into a cell or someone goes deliberately into a cell, and because they're having an exam the next day, just a quick example which we gave, and they're ready to sit there for 6 hours, they're not complaining. They put themselves in there, so they're able to walk out. And generally, you don't see that the confinement of the person is just another manner of the person's expressing themselves. Sometimes they express themselves, they're out of the cell, out of the room, and sometimes they put themselves in the room. But it's the same person. It's just two expressions of the same person. Sometimes you're able to see a lot of the person, the fact when they act so discreetly. The discreetness is a part of learning about this person now, the person's personality. Because it's the same two expressions of the same person, willingly, deliberate expressions. And so when we come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not real Gevura, Chas v'Shalom, nothing covers up over HaKadosh Baruch Hu's energy. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So once we know it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, so it's easier to uncover, it's easier to figure out even the chesed, the flow of the Ein Sof of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because at the end of the day, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we said, two hands of the same body, two expressions of the same soul. And in this case, two midas of Hashem. Hashem is echad, Hashem is one. His midas are also one. It's two expressions, but they're essentially unified. And therefore we could always find the emes Hashem and introduce it more and more to Eilam. Because we know the Gevura is coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So in today's class, you see it is a brackets over here. Very interesting. You see with the brackets, there's no real closure to this brackets. The Alter Rebbe does not close in the common print we see in the end of Dalet. He does not close. There's those who say the Perek Hey itself is part of the is an extension rather of the brackets of Perek Dalet. Conversely, it does not close in the end of Perek Hey. A lot has been spoke about it, especially by our Rebbe. You can see it. It'll be a whole biur explanation, be posted also eventually towards the end of chapter Hey of the Rebbe's appreciation of these prakim. And again, the closure or the non-closure of these brackets. But let's see. No question, you see it's a brackets. You see the Alter Rebbe goes deeper into this idea. So we have the Gilui and we have the Tzimtzum, the revelation of the cover-up, the manifestation and the concealment, the contraction. In other words, the concealment, the cover-up over this manifestation. So the Alter Rebbe says, just in Sfiras the Atzilus, in other words, Atzilus is a very structured Olam. Even though it's an Olam, as we spoke many times, it houses and hosts the Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Many times we spoke about this, we're not going to go into it now, but one thing it's clear, it's still an Olam Atzilus, it's a world. And it has Midas, really doesn't exist in the Ein Sof. There's such a thing, Olam, the Gemara says, B'lashon Hela v'Hester, the Ein Sof. Ein Sof is Ein Sof, so it's not about Hela v'Hester concealment. And again, in Ein Sof, in different levels higher than Atzilus, there's so many multitude of layers and levels and so on. I'm not going to get into it now, but generally the first Olam, formal Olam, is Olam Atzilus. There you have structured spheres, and all that naturally doesn't exist, at least not so emphatic the way it is in Atzilus, and divided and compartmentalized, and has each one its particular function. As an example, so we have, and that obviously doesn't exist higher than Atzilus. So they certainly not in its formal position and structure, understandably, because this is already only takes shape after an Olam is, can't say created, but emanated, Atzilus, emanation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're talking about the structured midas of chesed and gvura, again in the last few classes, namely in this chapter Dalet, which again sheds light and answers and reconciles the Alter Rebbe's question in the end of Perek Gimel. But here the Alter Rebbe goes on to the source of these kelim. So here they're divided, right? There's chesed and there's gvura. They're clearly divided, compartmentalized, each one in its own. And we know that in the end of the day, it's two expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the Alter Rebbe goes deeper, higher than that. And we say, the Alter Rebbe points out that you can see in areas of higher than one, it's not just two expressions of the same Hashem, though very distinct expressions. Chesed is not Gvura, Gvura is not Chesed, especially in the way it's explained in this very chapter. Not only it's not, one is not similar to the other, it's stark opposite, diametrically opposite in its expression. But we know they're both from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so they're essentially unified, and therefore, as we say, we could find the Chesed with HaKadosh Baruch Hu within the Gvura and so on. But the Alter Rebbe goes deeper, and he says in a deeper area, the unification of these two expressions are much more emphatic, much more than when they separate themselves as they take position in Olam HaAtzilus. And then we know in the end of the day they're two expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but deeper than that, the unification of them become so much more apparent and overtly appreciated. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is saying. The concealment are called kelim, containers. V'hachayis atzmi, the energy itself, which is again tantamount to gdulo, to chesed, as we learned in this very chapter, which is the chayis itself, is called oir, the light. Just like a keli, a container covers up on what is in it. And so too the concealment covers up and obscures the light and the energy which is coming from the source of light of energy, which is the oir, and the keli covers up over it. Now, what do we learn more in these words? It's namely going to be more indicative from the following words. Again, the message Alter Rebbe is saying over here. But what Alter Rebbe is saying over here is like, you need the package of both. Just like you have the sun. No one's going to say, you see the sun? We appreciate the sun. Its warmth and its light and its brightness and all what the sun contributes to creation. And we know that there's a nartik over the sun. There's a cover-up over the sun. We all know that. And again, the Gemara says it, and the Medrash says it. We began actually in the very Perek Dalet that the Mogin is nartik l'shemesh. There's a cover-up over the sun. Why is there a cover-up over the sun? Because if there wouldn't be a cover-up over the sun, we call it the nartik, the purse, literally a purse holds and covers all the important, if it's documents, money, wallet, over, and it covers up, it should stay safe. So you're able to walk out of the home instead of just a bunch of cash in your hands, and then you become, it's susceptible to losing it, and it'll be disorganized, and therefore, the money is there, the cards are there, but you can't really function without an organized purse. Similarly, or much easier to understand when it comes to the sun. If the sun would be without that covering, it'd be too bright. What does it mean, a sun too bright? Don't ask the question, because it's not, we wouldn't be here to ask the question. Within seconds, the entire world would burn up. And probably not only this world, it would be consumed into the enormous heat of the sun. So Hashem covers up on the sun. There's the cover up, the keli, the container, if you will, or the cover up over the sun, and when they both are functioning together in unison, that's the way the world has the brightness and has the warmth and all this which the sun contributes even to this planet. So when you look at the sun, you speak about the sun, you talk about the sun and its great contribution to planet Earth as an example. You don't say, the sun and its container, the sun and its cover-up are doing so well for so much. I appreciate it so much. It was so warm because the sun and the container were out this morning, and the sun and container were out this morning. Therefore, it was so bright. And the sun and the container were out this morning, and therefore my plants ultimately sprouted and grew so beautifully, and so on. We don't talk like that. The whole reason is not because it doesn't exist. It exists very much, and it's an important part of the manifestation of the sun. And again, without it, we would be consumed into the heat of the sun. So why don't we make an emphasis? Why don't we emphasize it? The answer is simple. Because that is part of the expression of the sun and this is what we're talking about. This is what we're focused on, the expression of the sun. This is what the sun benefits and contributes to the world. Again, in every area of its warmth and heat and brightness and so on. This is the phenomenon of the sun, of the expression of the sun, which you're so praising and appreciate so much, is the combination of the two. And therefore we need not to identify each one, because it's this which we benefit, it's this which we talk about is already the combination of the sun and its nartik. Because without the nartik it just wouldn't work, and that's what he pretty much says. We speak of the two spheres on a higher level. This is the air, this is the expression, the shine of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the light, literally air translated, and then there's the kelim, the container, which allows this very light to be productive, and ultimately to create, and ultimately to emanate and create, and even the way it comes to the Elam Haza, that the world should look like for the purpose that Hashem has, as we're going to learn later chapters, and we mention it yet briefly because it's a central theme through all of Sharich V'Emunah, for that matter, through all of Yiddishkeit. Nisava Kodesh Baruch Hu Lias Le'Dir B'Tachtenim. Kodesh Baruch Hu had a desire to have a dwelling place in the very physical, in an inferior world, and by the inferior, via the inferior. And in order to create all that, the world needed to appear exactly the way it appears. Because if you had the light opened up, in other words, that it would be so evident that there's the Dvar Hashem, which is Mahava Mechayim Mekayim, that would be default. In other words, we would see the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so this world would look like a bit like more like Gan Eden than the world that we see it. It'd be nice, it'd be great, but the whole master plan, why Hashem created everything, would not be able to come to fruition. So there's a master plan, and everything has to fit the master plan, and part of it that the world would appear exactly the way it appears. And therefore, there's the two expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's the Chesed and there's the Gvura. But the way they come into Eilam Atzilus, they're already established two distinct midas. But if you go deeper, it's the Eir, the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then there's the Kelim, which is the container over this Eir, in order that things should start happening. Because with the Eir itself, it would be, you're talking about the Eir Ein Sof, the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nothing could stand and nothing could exist. Understandably, nothing could exist on the face of the infinite. And therefore you need the Keli for that very Eir to express itself. So it's not only the Kelim, it's coming through the Kelim, and it was the Kelim, the container, is just there for the Eir, for the light itself to be identified, to be able to express itself and to create. And again, ultimately, HaKadosh Baruch Hu emanating and creating, ultimately creating this Elam Hazeh. As we know, I say ultimately, we spoke about many, many times, brought in so many other places, of the four Elam Atzilus, B'ri Yitzir Asi, and the many, many more myriads in Lashon Al Tereb elsewhere, infinite amount of worlds, ultimately till this world came about. And even it's not, again, just cause and effect, a clear evolution, but beyond that, we always need to introduce the idea of Bria Yesh Mi Ayin, which really begins in Elam HaBriya, but so much more emphatic in this very physical world, which is in Elam Hazeh HaGashmi. So you need that Eir in order to appreciate the Eir. The Eir should, the light should function. And you have the Keli, which is again normal, or it's just part of the phenomenon of appreciating the Eir. The Keli plays a role in appreciating the Eir itself. So on its source, it's really one idea. Later, eventually, it's divided and compartmentalized into separate midas. Even there, we know that these are two expressions of the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Similar to the two hands, are very distinct. One is different in its function. One is weaker, one is stronger, which is similar to the idea of Chesed and Gvura. Stronger means more expressive, Gvura less expressive. But they're all part of one organism. But nonetheless, in Eilam Atzilus, it's Chesed and Gvura. Higher than that, that's the Eir and the Keli, which the appreciation or the function of the Eir comes precisely through the Keli. And then he gives another, and again he makes it even more clear. What are the Kelim? The Kelim are the letters. The source of the letters are the 5 Eisius of Mansapach, Mem, Nun, Tzadik, Pei, Chof. What do we know? What is common in these letters? And that's why they represent all the Eisius, because each one of them has a Sofit, right? The Mem Sofit, Nun Sofit, Tzadik Sofit, and so on, the Pei and the Chof. And that itself, and that's why all the letters are expressed with these 5 letters. But let's just pause a moment. Why? What's the relevance of the Sofit idea? Because when a person talks, and as an example, right? So one person talks, and on the contrary, the more the eloquent way a person talks, and the more his words are structured, the more you see the organization, or they say the organized type of person, or the organized mind, and then the healthy mind, because we spoke about in other opportunities also. This is the Meiser Ha'adam min Behema, the advantage of man over any part of creation, even what borders man, which is animal in the Daimim Tzemeach Chai Medaber is the fact that he can talk. Talk is not just like playing in certain instruments, which again, there's the 5 instruments, also number 5. It says this corresponds to the Hey Gvuris, not to go into this now, because it's also 5. Again, the lips, the tongue, the throat, the gums, and the teeth. These are instruments to which the person is able to express these letters, but we all understand and know and appreciate that it's not just instruments. It doesn't work like instruments, that the instruments make the letters emerge from the person's mouth. It's not like that. To the contrary, because we have a healthy nefesh, the medaber, namely a structured, healthy medaber. It's everybody, but when you see it so much clearer by a healthy, structured medaber, that he's able to talk and the instruments follow suit. Again, it's not directly connected to this vart over here, but just as we're talking about it, we don't have to explain that it's not the instruments which form the letters. To the contrary, the instruments follow the letters the way they want, and the person has the desire, or the way the person desires to express precisely these letters, the instruments come into place, not the opposite. Dr. Rebbe speaks about it clearly in a beautiful chapter in Geras HaKodesh, but even there he says, you say Kamat Pasach. It's not you start with the moving your lips and then that expression would come, or that word would come with the kamatz or the pasach. To the contrary, you want to say something in that manner, so then the instruments subsequently kick in. But again, separate topic. But one thing is clear, that when you see a person talking, what's really happening? What's happening is a certain oxygen coming from the person. And then there is the ices, the actual letters, which grab that oxygen and formulate letters, ultimately words. Ultimately, in every language, there is communication between people. Lashon HaKodesh has a superiority over all these languages, as we explained. There's the connection to every word, the intrinsic connection of every word to this matter what you're talking about. But again, not for now. Not in this context, but when you see a person talking, what's happening simultaneous? There's oxygen coming, right? Just try to put your mouth in front of someone talking, or maybe in front of yourself. Don't bother anybody to put your hand in front of there when they're talking on there, because they feel that you're interrupting them. So in your own mouth, and you see that there's always, every word you say, there's oxygen coming from, like, so you blow, there's oxygen which you're extracting from yourself. When you talk, it's not so strong, like the Alter Rebbe writes, that blowing you can blow for a long time. Talking, a person can talk for a very long time, because it's a contained expression of emerging of the oxygen. In other words, it's very distinct as the blowing. The blowing comes from a deeper part within the person. That's what it says, Ve'ipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, which is the neshama of the Yid, comes from the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Based on this thought, as opposed to talking, Hashem spoke creation into being, as opposed to, right, we spoke about this in the very beginning of second chapter, which it tells us what the Yid is all about. The neshama comes from a deeper level within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the talking itself, there's also oxygen is emerged from the person's heart. Again, where the oxygen comes from, the combination from where it comes from, and that's what happens when a person talks. He is extracting oxygen, which eventually will become the words which he or she is talks and trying to express, but the with which they're trying to express themselves. So it's the oxygen, but the moment the oxygen emerges, it's, so to say, tackled by ices, by letters, which both of them together bring out the words, letters, the words, the phrases, the sentences. So we know it's a combination of two, because there is the phenomenon of oxygen, emerging oxygen, without the cap of the letters. That's when a person blows. We know that exists the other way around, that there could be iceus, words and letters, but it must have the oxygen to which it should hold on to. Because without emerging this oxygen, the letters don't have anything to hold on to. And if they don't have anything to hold on to, they don't ultimately, they don't have any structure or true reality of letters, no words, no phrases, no sentences, nothing at all. So when you hear a word, what's happening simultaneous is the combination, the immediate combination of two. The oxygen, which is being emerged from the person who wants to talk, who is actually talking, and the letters which capture that oxygen, and together you hear the word. If it's Baruch, it's Ato, it's in any language, whatever the person desires to talk about. And again, in every single language, in every manner of talking, that is what happens. That is what's transpiring. So when you hear someone talking and you say, well, he said that, and no one's going to say, well, he said that. So you know what happened? You know what really happened when this person spoke such and such? He expressed oxygen, and the letters has captured the oxygen, and both of them formulated a letter, a word, a phrase, a sentence, and that was the content of this sentence. And as such, what are we going to do about it? If it's a good thing or chas v'shalom, not a good, whatever. We don't say it like that, not because we don't want to waste time, because we're also accustomed to the idea of talking, and therefore we just focus on the content. It's not only because of that. It's true as well, but it's not only because of that. It's because when we look at the person expressing himself in words, that is what the talking is all about, because one cannot go without the other. In other words, the letters, if they don't have any oxygen to hold on to, they will not come out as structured letters, or no letters at all. If there's no letters, there's no words, there's no phrases, no sentences, there's nothing. There's no communication. And the only reason that the letters are able to express themselves is because there is the oxygen, which is really, not only there's oxygen, which the letters have something to hold on to present themselves, the oxygen is really the source and the energy of those very letters. That's what talking is about. The person is able to express themselves, but primarily it's the oxygen which emerges from the person. That is the koyach of the letters. But the oxygen itself, without the cap of the iceus, obviously you wouldn't hear anything as well. You would hear someone blowing, maybe not blowing so emphatic. It would be a lighter blow, but that's all it would be. And if that's all it would be, there would not be any communication. So the oxygen are the letters, are the words, but the ices are the caps, so to say, with both together, the synthesis of both, produce the word, the letter, the sentence. And therefore we don't differentiate them, because that's what they are. And again, what the Alter Rebbe is saying is, in Atzilus, they're categorized. This is Chesed, this is Gvura, because that's what Atzilus. It's a very structured world. So the Midas are structured and distinct, yet we know they're both coming from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Alter Rebbe says if you go deeper, it's just the oneness between these two phenomena are really so obvious. The oneness of these two expressions are really in their source. They're truly, essentially one. Not only because they are two expressions of the same entity, of the same God, of the same Hashem, but in the core levels, they're truly one. And again, Alter Rebbe gives these examples. That when you see Eidos and Kelim, the Kelim are there to express the very Eir. Those Ices, those letters, express the very core of the words, which is the oxygen itself. Yes, you can differentiate. This is the oxygen, which is again the source or the vitality of these very words. And these are the Ices, which combine with the oxygen. Yeah, you can do that. But when you hear someone talking, what you're experiencing is already the combination of both. The ices are there to formulate the koyach of the oxygen, which this is the source of the words of the letters, not so much the ices. It's the oxygen, while these letters give that formation to the oxygen. So you right away see that oneness as opposed to two distinct expressions, and ultimately, again, explaining to yourself, and that is ultimately the emes, that they're both they're both expressions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but deeper yet, you don't need to say these are two distinct expressions coming from the same Hashem, but on the onset, you don't differentiate them. You see the oneness, because in order for words to come to expression, you need both of them, the isis, the oxygen primarily, which is the real kayach of the isis, and the isis and the letters just giving formation to this oxygen. And you don't differentiate them. You don't look at it as two distinct kayachs, as two distinct forces, but you only see them on the onset as one. Why the mansapach? Because again, the koyach of hakbala, which is limitation, which is what the isis are all about. They're a cap onto this expression of oxygen. So you think about a cap. What emphasizes most the cap, the hakbala, the limitation, that the oxygen shouldn't flow randomly, and then there's no appreciation at all, no communication, as we noted. In this context, is the isis, but within the isis letters themselves, these letters bring out more the idea of gvura, the limitation, the block. Why so? When you say chaf, mem safit, when you see the mem, that mem safit, in the end of a word, you see that's the end of a word. You cannot continue the word after the mem safit. You cannot continue the nun, the word after you have the nun safit, the langenun, as it's known in Yiddish. You see the kayach of hakbala, limitation. It's stopped. It's the conclusion of something. So what encapsulates the idea of isis more than any other letters of the 22 letters is these letters, because they're the safit, the idea of hakbala, but they represent ultimately the entire 22 letters of the alphabet, which has again the commonality between the two is that they're there to be magbil, to limit the oxygen that ultimately words, sentences, phrases should be formulated. So he says these are the isis matzabah shein hey gvuras hamachalkis, which divide mafridis hahevel v'akel behemet saper, which divide and separate the oxygen and the voice. Right? You need a division, because even the oxygen takes the next step, that it expresses itself in a voice. Still no communication. There has to be structured letters, structured words. So there's the oxygen, and then the oxygen, there's the voice which comes onto that oxygen, but it would just be a plain flat voice tone, no message at all. And then you have the isis, which are mafrid, which separate that voice to 22 letters, again in any single language, as we're talking about as an example, Lashon HaKodesh. Then there's structured words, letters, words, sentences, phrases, etc. And it goes on, and again the number 5, as it says also the 5 instruments of the mouth, as we mentioned before, also number 5. Explain a number of places. The gvuris, there's heichsadim, heigvuris. Alter Rebbe explains it a whole in Likutei Torah, based on other Sifrei Kabbalah, the number 5, not to go into it now. But he says the Shadish of Heigvuris, the very source of the Heigvuris, is called Butzina de Kardunisa. Literally translated, the light which comes from darkness. What does that mean? He says, when you say light coming from darkness, meaning to say the only way the light could be expressed is when there is darkness. As we just said. In order that there should be light, you need the kelim, you need the container. In order the sun should shine, you need the nartek. In order that letters should be able to be expressed, you need the isis. So when you see that the butzina, the light coming from kardunisa, from darkness, you see over here the total oneness of the light and the darkness, to the extent that you don't only say that there's light, and in other words, expression of Hashem, and that has to be covered in order that we should appreciate this expression. If it's sun, or any other type of expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in this case Chesed Gvura. But it goes much deeper. The light itself, in order the process of light should begin, it needs the Gvura on the onset to hold it back, that it should come in a synchronized, limited way that ultimately should be able to be expressed, every light, every expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or in any level that you talk about, to come to actualization, to expression, to a state of manifestation. What does that tell you? That the Kardunisa, the darkness, is part of the Butzina itself. Because the mere fact that you say light, so there's two ideas over here. One, the fact that you say light, you're focusing on the appreciation of the Mekabel, of the recipient of that light, and that can only go when there's a Keli, when there's something holding it back. If it's again the Nartik over the Shemesh, or the Kelim over the Iris, because already you're talking about the appreciation of the Mekabel. So there's Ayr, there's already the Kardunisa, the Gvura. But it's even deeper. It says a number of places, every Gilui, every revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even the highest levels, that cannot be the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why it says Yeshe B'Seiser, in the true core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in hiddenness. More than Gilui, because Gilui is an expression. Expression has a certain sense, even the expression of the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a certain sense of definition. One way or another, subtly. And the fact that it could be the Gilui, there's a Gilui, is because there's a Gvura on the onset, is allowing the Ayr just even to emerge. You need the Gvura there, which is again contraction of the purity, the purest levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Ein Sof, the true core of the Ein Sof. You need the Gvura to hold it back, that the Ayr should even be expressed in a way of Ayr. How much more so the former idea, because when you say Ayr, you're referring to the Mekabel, certainly you need the Kardunisa. But what does this tell you? That in core essential levels, they're truly one. When you see Ayr, right away there is, that itself says, there is the Gvura, there is the Kardunisa, which allows the Ayr to come and express itself in that manner. When you hear someone talking, which is again, it's an expression which ultimately would be benefit by normal people, good people. Every word they say is wise, kind, and so on, which ultimately would bring more wisdom, more kindness to themselves, to the society, and the world around them, as an example. So those words have an incredible kayach. But when you speak about those words right away, you understand that there's the oxygen, which is divested of any iseus word structure, because it's the core, it's the expression of the person, or in comparison to the iseus, it's more the inwardness of the person being emerged before the iseus bring formation to that oxygen. You understand that's exactly what it is. That's what words are all about. It's the oxygen which is emerged from the person. But you understand as well that the oxygen is not enough. You need the cap of the words, the iseus, in order to bring formation to this oxygen, that there should be these words of wisdom or words of kindness. So on that level, when you hear the person talking, you don't differentiate and say, that's chesed, that's gvura, and they're coming from the same person. On these levels, you see the true oneness of both of these expressions, and it comes out so much more emphatically than not that there's the butzina, and on top is the kardunisa, which would say it's two entities. It's the expression and then the cover up over the expression. The way it ultimately manifests in Elam Atzilus, but beyond that, butzino di kardunisa. In order the light should come out, it's just because there was already a gvura in the very onset, which allowed the Ayr to come out and to express itself. Which tells us more and more, and that the deeper you get this idea, the more the focus on the inner workings of this, which would ultimately manifest into distinct midas chesed and gvura, you see more and more the oneness, which tells you also that when they do become two distinct midas, they're also truly one. And what is this butzina the kardunisa? This is the gvura ilah, the atik yemin. It's the supreme gvura of Atik Yomin, and Sheiresh HaChasadim Ugamkin Chesed the Atik Yomin. The source of Chesed is also Chesed of Atik Yomin. It's known for those who understand Chochmah Nistora, the hidden Chochmah, the hidden wisdom of Torah. And very brief, when we say Atik Yomin, literally Atik Yomin means removed from days. And it's explained, we're not going to go into it completely, but it's explained in a number of places of Chassidus that it can between the Ein Sof, the way the Eibush just forms himself by himself, and then eventually to form, or even the emanation of Elam Atzil. It's not a creation; it's emanation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But nonetheless, it's a structured world, one way or another. It's called Elam Atzilus, and then there's Midas, and so on and so forth. There has to be the intermediary, the interface between both of them. And it says in Kabbalah, this is the level of Keser. The crown, just like the crown is over the mind, over the head, where you have the divisions, the cognitive divisions, Chochmah, Bina, Das, and so on. The crown surrounds the head. So too, there's the Keser, which is beyond Seder Ishtalshalus, beyond even Elam Atzilus, which this is, so to say, serves as the intermediary. It's explained in many, many places in Kabbalah, in Likutei Torah, in expansiveness, many memorim, particularly speaking about the Keser as the intermediary between the Ein Eibishter, the way he has formed himself by himself, till the Seder Ishtalshalus, starting from Atzilus, would begin. And in Keser itself, there's two levels. There's the level of Arich, which is called Sheirish HaNe'etzalim, the source of the emanation. And then there's Atik, which is, it's called the Achreina Shebematzil, the lower end, if you will, how could you say lower end of an infinite creator? But basically the idea, as he explains there, it's the idea within HaKadosh Baruch Hu to become one day the emanator. That's called Achreina Shebematzil. You can see it again in towards the beginning of the Alter Rebbe's Bir and Shir Hashirim and Likutei Torah, which is part of the Eibishter himself. It's the Atik. Atik means he's removed from Yomin. That's literally means Atik Yomin. He's removed from days. It's beyond the source of emanation. It's the Achreina Shebematzil of the emanator, while the lower level of Keser, which is called Arich, is the Rishona Shebenetzalim, the higher L'Reish of Ne'etzalim. In other words, a step away, because the fact that it's a root, a shadish, the shadish, in other words, ultimately it's a root, which everything naturally is very subtle there. You don't have a structured Olam, Chas v'Shalom in Keser, even in Arich, you certainly don't have the Midas, the way they are in Atzilus, but nonetheless, they are shadish, a root, and a source of the Netzalim, while Atik is Atik Yomin. It's removed from days, even days, the way they're expressed, not only in Elam Atzilus, even days, the way you're expressed in this very subtle way in Arich. And that's where you have Chesed and Gvura. It's not Chesed, right? One could argue, you just said it's beyond that, beyond Yemin, beyond structure. How could you say Chesed and how could you say Gvura? But that's what we're talking about. That you cannot say anything structured, Chesed and Gvura. It's all one, because it's all part of the core of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in that area, based on what he just explained, it's truly one. Because you're dealing with Atik Yamin, you're dealing with Eived Eibishter is completely removed from any Yamin. So when you have Chesed and Atik, you have that Butzina and Kardanisa, it's truly one entity there. It's only later when it would emerge, then it takes position, structure, naturally, very even subtly in Arich, in the lower level of Keser, and then how much more so in Atzilus, and how much more so as there's the evolution of all the other Elam, as Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, and so on and so forth. And even there, we always make the connection between the two distinct midas to the way they are in its source, that it's one Nekuda in Atik Yamin, and ultimately the message, it's one Eibishter. So every expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the end of the day, by definition, they're meant to be unified because it's belonging to one Eibishter, one Hashem. It's two expressions of the same God. But more so, if you go closer and closer to the source, you see in the end of the day, it's one Nekuda, one idea. And so the Gvura is the Gvura of Atik Yamin, and the source of Chasadim is Chesed Atik Yamin. It's one Atik Yamin. meaning to say completely removed from any yemim, any structure, so that essentially on that level they're one. Now, I will just mention that there's a lot, it would take a lot to go into this whole idea of Keser, Arich, Atik, but it's and one could look at all the references. You can see it online on this very site in the footnotes where you could see more information on this subject, on these subjects. Alter Rebbe has it again very expansively. Other Mamorim of the hundreds of Svarim, Sifrei Chassidus, which speak about these levels of Keser, two levels of Keser, Arich and Atik. But in this context, the main message is that on the deeper level, they're truly one, the Atik, the Chesed and the Gvura, as they're both. In other words, the Chesed is Chesed of Atik Yemen, and the source of Chesed is Chesed of Atik Yemen, and the source of Gvura is Gvura of Atik Yemen. As such, the message is that on the onset, they are essentially one. Have a good